Hi, I'm Ems, aka on Dark and Wings. So it's been ages since I've made anything terrain related in my YouTube videos. If you've been following my hobby journey online for a while, you probably know that I'm a fan of terrain, especially making it look post-apocalyptic and dystopian in the style of Necromunda and games like Fallout. As much as I like making things like that, it does take up a lot of room, and I ran out of room and had to get rid of some of them. Granted, I kept the pre-bought Games Workshop type terrain pieces, and the thing is I could always just 3D print more, but I'm in the middle of moving hobby spaces to a larger area, so I thought I would take a crack at doing some more terrain again, and I'd ease myself back in with some Necromunda tiles as they're easy to store as well. I snapped these up from an FLG recently. I've always wanted some, and they tend to sell out quite quickly online, and you can find them now and again in some places. So I wanted these to look more like they were in the Ashwastes, either out in the desert somewhere or part of an outpost. So first of all, I'm adding texture to it before I even paint it. If you get some sandy paste or whatever other brand that you like, and you could even just use some DIY grout, you know, the stuff that's used for gap filling. And then I've got some sand here, and I've also got some very small fine rocks. So basically this will allow me to build up some verdigris and texture and make it look more natural on the tile. I like using these Magnum lollipop sticks. It's a good excuse to eat ice cream, but they're great for spreading out paste. These are great for adding paste to bases and terrain kits when they're larger. I'm keeping this texture quite thin so it dries quicker, and also it'll be easy to store them on top of each other. So you get the idea of what I'm going for here. I'm just randomizing this. And then what I've done is grab some super glue and then again randomized it, as I'm going to be sticking down some of that sand. I like to use an old protein powder scoop for this, so I can control how much comes out. No, I'm not flexing that I work out here, but yeah, I do like to lift weights. I also added some of the small fine rocks, as I mentioned, just to create something a bit different in textures. So here is how it looks once it's all dried. We've got some nice different textures and aesthetic going on here to make it more realistic and more interesting once it's painted up. And then I primed this once it was dried. I started off with matte black from Colourforge. These are fantastic paints. They sent me quite a few out to look at, and I'll put the link in the description below where I get a bit of kit back if you buy from that website. And then I used a Hydrax brown over the top. That's similar to Rhinox hide. That's to simulate rust. And as you can see here, this is all dried up and it looks all rusty and crusty and ready for Necromunda. Once that base coat had dried, I got out some chipping medium. So the chipping medium, I shake it up and I put some all around the different tiles, making a note of where they are because this layer will be covered up. I then went over the top with a brush just to spread it out more evenly. I am using Vallejo chipping medium here. Once that had dried up, I put another layer over the top, and it's this weird chalky white paint which tends to crackle, this chalk finish. Obviously it's not good for priming your miniatures with, but it's awesome for making post-apocalyptic looking terrain. I wanted to add some hazard stripes because it wouldn't be a Necromunda piece of terrain without some hazard stripes on it. This is something I 3D printed. If you just Google hazard stripe stencils, and you can find a load of STLs. You can also buy these as well. So I block painted the areas in yellow. Granted, it could have been neater, but I'm not too bothered because it's going to be weathered afterwards. And then I cut this down a bit more so it fits snugly. I then airbrushed on some black paint. The stencil can be a little bit fiddly, so make sure you hold it down properly. And then when you're airbrushing it on, do it gently over time, otherwise you could make some mistakes. As you can see here, I sprayed on far too much and it leaked out under the stencil and kind of ruined it. Masking tape would have been neater, however it would have taken a lot more time, and as I said before, this is going to be weathered heavily anyway, so I wasn't too bothered and it saved me some time. I also added these awesome looking decals here. I wanted to get more practice in with using decals, and this is quite a flat area, and obviously if anything went wrong I could just again weather it as it's a Necromunda piece. The decals I used are official Necromunda Ashwastes ones, so I thought they would be apt to use on this tile, as obviously I'm making them into Ashwaste ones. I was super happy and surprised to find these are actually on the Warhammer website, as I was looking for the Underhive ones, however they're completely sold out, and you can only get them on eBay, and they go for like ridiculous prices, so these are still available. So after all that waffle, I went back in and reactivated the chipping medium. So what you do now is you put water over your top layer of paint. You can just pop this on with a brush. And then after that, you want to start to brush away the paint layers. So you can grab an old toothbrush or a half-dead brush that's stiff. Those are really good. And you can use a hobby knife or you could use a cocktail stick, whatever. So here's an area I've already chipped previously. And as you can see, I just scrubbed it off and it creates this really interesting randomization, which is visually interesting and looks like real rust. So here are the areas I chipped away at, and I also went over with some more colours. So I've gone for a morphine brown and some orange. You've probably heard of this before, but an easy way to weather things is to get off a piece of sponge and then dip it in some paint and go dabbing it round like almost a dry brush. Alternatively, you can just get an old crappy brush and fill it up with paint and then go and dab it round, which is what I prefer to do, as it's a bit more controlled. I think one of my favourite things about rust and decay is the amount of different colours that pop through, which is something I think is often forgotten. And if you look at real examples of rust, there's a lot of cool colours and bits that come through. I also went around with a hobby knife and scored these areas to make them look more weathered. And once I was happy with all of this, I went over with a layer of matte varnish. The reason for the matte varnish is it'll stop the chipping medium from reactivating, and it'll also set in place all the other paints. Plus it'll make it easy for the next step, which will be adding some washes. So I'm using this Chaos Dirt from AK Wargames. This is an enamel paint. In a similar vein to oil paints, you'll have to thin them down with a mineral spirit. I usually decant these types of washes into a small cup like this. It just makes it easier and it's less messy. Matte varnish has a lot of really cool uses, and one of them is if you put it down and then put oil washes or enamel washes over the top of it, that paint will just go straight into the recesses. And it's a process called pin washing, and you can look it up on YouTube. It's really cool and adds a lot of detail and depth. The enamel wash just wasn't as intense as I wanted it to be, as I want this piece to look really rusted. So I mixed some brown oil paint from Winsor & Newton, fantastic brand, in with some mineral spirits and made my own wash. I let that settle in for a while, so half an hour to an hour, and then I wiped away the excess. What I did was grab a baby wipe and dip it in some of the mineral spirits and then go around and clean it up a bit. You can use cotton swabs as well, but I thought with such a large surface area this would be easier. And plus I'm not a big fan of using the cotton swabs. If I do use them, I like to use the specialist hobby ones, otherwise it leaves hair and residue. I'm super pleased with how this is turning out. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this. As I said before, I absolutely love colour when it comes to rusting and just in general. So I went with this Abbey Teal Lung, or however you pronounce it, sorry butchering it. And it's this lovely turquoise oil paint, and it's so good for rust. It's a super intense and vibrant colour, but I'm being sparingly with this as it's already quite weathered and colourful as it is. For some more touches of the ash wastes, I grabbed that sandy paste from before and thinly applied it, as well as some of these rocks. I didn't go too over the top with this. I wanted it so it would look like some sort of ash waste desert sand, and then I grabbed these Vallejo pigments just to add a bit more depth to it. And here are the final results. I'm really pleased with this. It far exceeded my expectations, and it's definitely made me hungry for doing more terrain. It definitely looks like an old industrial outpost out in the ash wastes, or even something you could see in real life. There's a lot of depth to it and a lot of colours and textures, and it's super visually interesting and kind of looks like an art piece, like a canvas to me. As always, thank you for watching. Remember to enjoy your hobbies for yourself. Respect that people enjoy them in their own ways. And at the end of the day, they're just war dollies. I'll see you in the next one.